it's the Christian Prepster, and I just wanted to thank you all for watching my first Living Fearfully and Wonderfully video. I am so excited for you guys to meet Katie. She is a wife and a mother of 4 beautiful children, and I believe that she really lives out the call to be a godly woman in today's society. So I'm so excited for you guys to meet her, hear her story, and see what she has to say. Let's get to it. Okay, so I'm with my cousin Katie, and I'm going to be interviewing her today about being a godly woman, wife, and mother. First thing I was wondering is if you could please tell me your story about what the Lord has done in your life to get you to this spot of being a godly woman.
That's a huge question. I think that the simple answer to that is that God has done what God does, which is to never let go and to continually be putting fireworks of His love and His goodness all around me, so that no matter what season of life I was in or how young, I can even think back to being a child, there was evidence of God's mercy and goodness. And I didn't always see it, but it was there. And I think that that is what God does. I grew up with, a lot of people. I'm so thankful. Certainly not perfect people, but people who were surrounding me, who loved me enough to tell me about Jesus. And I'm so thankful for that. And some people were family members, and other times they were, people that kind of pop in and out of your life that just tell you and point you to the Lord. And so I think I always knew that I was a part of something bigger, and that bigger was, this God thing. But it wasn't until that story became very personal to me as a teenager that I started to accept that faith, really as my own. And there was a lot of pain and hurt and a lot of shame that I even just put upon myself as a young woman. And so I think one of the things that God did, to bring me to this place today is to show me that I had built up a house, all around me. I was kind of living in the past, or living in a house of pain, or a house of shame, or a house of you're not quite good enough. And God kind of said, why are you living there? Because you're supposed to be living in me, and you're living in the wrong place. And so it was almost as difficult and yet as easy as walking out the door and not turning back.
That's awesome. In your opinion, what is a godly wife and a godly mother?
Okay, so I think that's an interesting question, because I don't think it looks like one specific thing. I think in a way that would be like saying, what is beauty? We can't just say, well, beauty is this. Mm-hmm. But what we know is what beauty does to us inside. And so when I think of what is a godly woman or a godly mother or a godly wife, it certainly doesn't look like one thing. We couldn't say, well, a godly woman wears this type of clothing, or a godly woman behaves this way all the time. Because if you just look across the world at the diversity of women, we're going to look so differently. We're going to behave differently because of our cultures and our traditions. And so I don't think any of those things make us godly or not godly. But when I think of a godly woman, I guess I think of a woman who's in this constant state of change, like that Play-Doh. Mm-hmm. Because a godly woman could never be someone who is just standing still. Because to be godly means that we're in this constant communion with the Lord, and therefore we are always being pressed onward and being changed from within. So maybe the first thing that makes a godly wife, mother, and woman would be a woman who is allowing God to mold her and make her into something new every day.
That's really cool. I never thought of how it's kind of like beauty. That makes a lot of sense, because mm-hmm. everyone's different. So it's going to be different for every person.
Right.
That's cool. What are some things that you've had to overcome to become a godly woman? You kind of touched base on shame and not thinking you were good enough, but is there anything else that you
having to overcome myself. Yeah. And how do I explain that, though? Let's think here. In order to become what I feel like, where I feel like God has brought me to saying, it's okay, let me just go back. It's really weird for me to say, I am a godly woman. What comes more natural for me now is to be able to proclaim, I'm a child of God. I don't know that I still look at myself as a woman. I still feel like a child. And so I have 4 children, and I guess I am a woman. I have my own home, my own farm, I have the children, but I don't ever feel like I've arrived at some godly woman status. So maybe allowing myself to just be little, be small in front of the Lord has been part of that becoming a godly woman. Putting down all the stuff I thought I knew, all the stuff I read in books, all the stuff I thought I was doing right, all my motivations and expectations, and just letting myself be teachable before the Lord has probably what has allowed me to become maybe what you see as a godly woman, even though I feel like a child, you know. Something that I've had to do is quiet everything else. And that has helped me become a better, if not more godly, a better mom and wife. And that is to not necessarily listen to what our culture says, even positive culture, church culture, good culture, because so we homeschool, and the more I learn about history, the more I learn what good, loving families have done throughout history. I'm like, they were crazy. Look what they did. You know, like it used to be totally acceptable in colonial days. Parents sat at the table while their kids just stood in the room. And then when parents were done eating, the kids would come and they would eat the scraps. And culturally, that was accepted. And so then I look at that and I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I do now that is actually causing harm to my husband's spirit or my kid's spirit, but that is still culturally accepted? And so I think that one of the biggest things that I do now is quiet culture and quiet all the other voices and say, Lord, how do you want me to live? Whether it makes sense with this culture or not.
What are some ways that you found to quiet the culture? Because that sounds very difficult to do.
Well, one, which not everybody can do, we literally moved to the middle of nowhere. So I can open my front door and there's nobody for a long time. But the other thing is to unplug, to turn it off, to be the person that's not always in the loop. And that was really hard because, man, if you are not on Facebook, it's not even that you just don't get the tidbits of news from people that you think are terrific, but you literally don't get the invites to parties. You don't get the news that a dear friend has, chemo this week. You miss out. And there was a lot of times I was like, oh, I'm just not in the loop, and I wasn't okay with that. I'm okay with it now, to just not always have to be in the know. So turning off everything. But it's not about Facebook or Twitter or because, goodness sakes, even without those things, we still struggle. I think we've always struggled being still. Otherwise, long ago in the Bible, God would not have had to told us to be still and know that I'm God. So it certainly is not the internet's fault. There are voices, people talking at us all the time, and to shut it off and to have quiet time. And I think this past year there was a little struggle. We have a fantastic friend group, and they're all going to the same church, and this is a dynamic, really great church. And so of course they wanted us to go with them, and the church is doing really fantastic things, but it's very loud. The church is really loud, so loud that I couldn't hold my baby in it, and I was having to leave, and I kept going back because I was like, okay, this is a good place with people that are really trying to be redemptive and to spread love into the community. But the church itself was about, let's make noise for the Lord, which is good, right? But I felt God breathing into me that I was in a different season, that I was in a season where I needed not to practice the noise of the Lord, but that I needed to be better at simply being still. And so a very hard thing for Jason and I to do was to not go to church with our friends. And we felt isolated. Now, they never tried to make us feel isolated, but they were all going and we weren't. And so there was a whole season where instead of going and having this community, I was sitting outside under my willow tree. But some amazing things happened in that quiet and in that rest. And I got to see that, yes, let's make noise for the Lord, let's be loud, but we have to have that balance. So I had to quiet all of that other stuff out just to be able to hear his voice.
Is there any advice that you could have used as a younger girl about living a godly lifestyle?
Absolutely. I think I would have liked to have known then how much I needed other women. That there was no shame in craving and in needing and in admitting how much I needed other women in my life. I always felt like I was supposed to be super independent. And I think in that came then a lot of pride and a lot of really bad decisions that then came shame. And if I had just known then that it was really okay to just admit how much I needed other women to be walking with me, I think there would have been a lot more wisdom found and a lot more community that I didn't have. I also wish that I had known that I was going to change, like, dynamically with each season of my life, and that was okay. That who I was at 15 was not going to be who I was at 18, and then 20, and now 35. And I even have to laugh at this interview because I think to myself, how am I going to look back at this? Am I going to be embarrassed about things that I said? Because God's going to, he keeps bringing you forward and showing you more things. But I feel like I always had to have it figured out. And maybe that's because I was the oldest sibling. So, the oldest sister kind of has to be the know-it-all, I guess. And so I'm finally at this place where there is just like no shame in saying, yeah, I have no idea, except that God is good and that there is a tomorrow. So I would just would have been a lot more relaxed, I think, as a young woman if I had known how okay it was to not have things figured out.
Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about being a godly wife or a godly mother?
Sure. Yeah, maybe just two things I think of. On this path to being a godly wife and mother, there's been a lot of dying to self. For example, I wanted to do this interview with you. We wanted to do it about an hour and a half ago. And my littlest one was not taking a nap. And so I kept having to leave, the interview to go pat his back and nurse him and stuff. And there would have been a time in my life where I think that would have created resentment because it was interrupting my plans. Like, come on, just go to sleep. And it's interesting because I ended up putting him in a carrier and we went walking, and he still didn't go to sleep, by the way. But as I was walking, I was noticing, I was like, there's no resentment. There's no anger that my plans were interrupted. I don't need me time right now. I'm so happy to be holding him. I think being a mother and a wife, being a friend, it requires us to put ourselves aside. But I really think sometimes when we talk about that, we talk about how hard that is. But I really feel like when we put that into practice, God brings it full circle. And he's like, yeah, you're going to put yourself aside, but I am going to bless you. I'm out there walking with him, and I want to be in here doing this thing with you, and yet he's rubbing my hair, and he's nuzzling up against me, and he's giving me kisses. And look what I would have missed if I had allowed resentment, to come in place with that. And so I think part of that, being a godly woman, is allowing ourselves to die so that we can love others, so that in turn we can receive this amazing love back, and maybe the only other thing that God has taught me this year about godliness is that there are so many people that are just talking about the state of the world right now. It's this chaos. It's been chaos from the beginning. And we homeschool, so we read a lot of history. And the more I read about history, the more I'm like, oh, Lord, when you said there's nothing new under the sun, you meant it. The world is in no different of a place than it has ever been. And people have suffered for so long, and it's only privilege that I think makes us feel like, oh my goodness, suddenly my world is shaking. So I feel like part of godliness, or maybe where God would want to bring us as individuals, is if we're feeling shaky about the state of the world now, to use that shakiness to have compassion for those whose lives have always been shaky, and to be able to understand to our very bones what it must be like to live as other people live, and then to know how to befriend them better and show them the love of Christ in a way that maybe we couldn't have from this place of safety.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me a lot more faith in God to look back and go, oh, this is not new to God. This craziness that humans hurting humans and people doing this is exactly why we need Christ. This makes sense to me now. So I don't know if that explains, but that's been a huge part of my sense of being a godly woman is I'm not being shaken by the state of the world, not even for my children, because this is not new, and God is God through all of it, and He will continue to be until the very end.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.